This is the Dreamers Podcast, episode 66, with Kiersten and Julien from Rich and Regular. Today is April 19th, 2022.
Your relationship with money is a relationship. It requires you to check in and change your mind and consider new information and revisit decisions that you've made. And when you do that, that is when you actually discover the freedom that's associated with financial independence and wealth. Is when you feel compelled and don't feel stuck into one path of doing things, you can actually experience life as it's meant to be lived.
Hello, world. Welcome to the Dreamers Podcast. I am Stephanie Anne-Lyse, also known as Anne-Lyse Wealth. I'm a financial coach and an author. I self-published my first book, Dream of Legacy, a guide to help dreamers reach financial independence and build generational wealth. In this podcast, I'll have conversations with experts and thought leaders who dare to follow their dreams. You'll hear about their journey and their money stories. I hope it inspires you, dreamers out there, to live life on your own terms.
Come on, dreamers, let's change the world!
This podcast is brought to you by Dream of Legacy. Check out dreamoflegacy.com for resources to assist you on your journey to financial independence. Before we get into today's episode, please take a couple minutes to go into Apple Podcasts if you're listening from an Apple device to rate and review the podcast. If you appreciate the free resources that are provided in this podcast, then the best way to let me know is to do just that. Reviews help the podcast be more visible and it helps other dreamers discover the podcast. So thank you. I appreciate you. And now let's get back to today's episode. Hello, welcome to the Dreamers Podcast. I'm your host, Anne-Lyse Wealth, and I'm so happy that you are here today for another episode of the podcast. If you are a brand new listener, thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy today's episode. If you've been listening for a while, then thank you as well. I appreciate you, and I hope that you continue to listen. On today's episode, I am chatting with Julien and Kiersten Saunders, the Atlanta-based couple behind the award-winning platform Rich and Regular. They are also co-authors of the book Cashing Out, Win the Wealth Game by Walking Away, that's coming out on Juneteenth. Julien and Kiersten are producers of the award-winning video series called Money on the Table, and they are the host of the Rich and Regular podcast. Their mission is to inspire better conversations about money. They started their journey as a couple, paying off $200,000 in debt in 5 years, and they've lived frugally while working in corporate America, invested, and were able to walk away from their corporate jobs before turning 40 to become full-time digital entrepreneurs. When they're not sharing stories about their experiences with money, they are parents to their son, Beau. I don't know if you know this, but Beau in French actually means gorgeous. They also love to travel the world or search for the next great meal. A little story here. When I released my first book, Dream of Legacy, Raising Strong and Financially Secure Black Kids, Kiersten and Julien are one of the couples that I had in my book. I really enjoyed their blog and their debt payoff story and how they were spreading the message of financial independence. It was great to be able to interview them for this podcast episode. We touched on so many different topics, from how they adjusted their mindset around money over the years, how they built wealth and learned along the way that what gets you to one point is not necessarily what is going to get you to the next one. So we talk about their journey as real estate investors and how they became digital entrepreneurs, how to win playing your own rules, and so much more. Here is Kiersten and Julien. Kiersten and Julien, welcome to the Dreamers Podcast.
Thank you so much. We're excited to be here.
So for listeners who might not be familiar with you guys, can you share a little bit about you and what you do?
Yeah, so we are Atlanta-based bloggers and entrepreneurs who run a site called Rich and Regular. And Rich and Regular started as just a place to document our own journey to financial independence. The name comes from kind of this play on words of rich and famous, where a lot of people, particularly Black people, feel like the two are the same. They conflate the two. if they want to be rich, they got to be famous, they got to be exceptionally good at something. And what we wanted to show is that you can actually be quite regular. You can just be a consistent, dare I say, boring investor and end up in a really advantageous financial position. And so we tell a lot of stories on our website about how we paid off $200,000 worth of debt over 5 years, how we're raising our son, how we're taking care of Julian's mother in the later years of her life, and just how we're overcoming all of the obstacles that come with wealth building as a young family.
And so, Kiersten, I've been reading the blog for a couple of years, and you shared that you haven't always been, quote unquote, good with money. So, can you talk
Yeah.
a bit about how you've adjusted your views about how you manage your money over time?
Yeah, I came from a place where I think money needed to be managed. I just thought money needed to be made. And if you could focus on income and career and being really good at making money, then the rest would take care of itself. And about $30,000 worth of debt later, I realized that actually money does need to be managed. And if you don't manage your money, then you're likely to fall into the trap of consumerism and debt and all of the other things that come along with that. And so I credited Julian for a lot of that realization, or at least the timing of the realization. I probably would have come to the same conclusion on my own. But when I met him, I was kind of at the peak of my spending, and I knew that it wasn't something that would be sustainable. And so when he introduced these ideas of financial independence and DIY investing, didn't need this financial advisor that I was paying $500 a month to. I started to really open up my eyes and realize that I could take control of my future and create a plan for myself that made sense.
And so, Julian, so how did you even come across all those concepts early on?
I think my earliest memories of learning about money and really taking it seriously came in graduate school. There was just something about studying for being an MBA and learning a lot about business that I just kind of feel like I was at my peak nerdiness. And when I wasn't studying and doing reports, I would just find myself imagining what my life was going to be like when I was done with school and I had hopefully a larger paycheck than what I was earning at the time. And I think in the process of simply learning more about money, I think a lot of people do. You start thinking about, what am I going to do with this money when I get it? I just started finding and learning a lot about investing, which led me to real estate investing, which is what led me to the FIRE movement. In that sense, has led me to digital entrepreneurship, which is the world that we're in now, and venturing into tech and all of those other things. And so it was really just going down the internet rabbit holes and seeing what was out there, finding personalities and really being drawn to stories that really moved me. But I think another part of it was that, and this is kind of where my personal financial life intersects with my social life, I think I always kind of knew that being in corporate America was going to be a very comfortable or an uncomfortable experience for me as a Black man. And so it was upon me to think about other ways to still be able to earn income that did not require me to put myself in environments that I didn't necessarily feel would be comfortable. So that was sort of the beginnings of it all.
It's interesting because I recently read the 3-part resignation story that you guys had on the blog. And I was actually in corporate America for a while, and I left corporate America for 2 years for very similar reasons. So I'm just very curious to hear about some of the feedback that you guys received from that.
The feedback we got was exactly what I expected. And as a marketer, it is very challenging, dare I say frustrating, but it really highlights the imbalance of the power dynamic that exists between employers and employees. And so for us as relatively wealthy people, we feel like it is on us to speak on their behalf. And so all of that to say, the response has been largely private. People like it. Dare I say, were triggered. Many people use that word and say, man, you just took me back to a very similar experience as you just did. But you're not going to see people sharing that on their timeline. Why? Because they may be friends with coworkers. They may be friends with their bosses. There's this sense of fear that employers and prospective employers are looking down on us and saying, oh my gosh, well, I don't want to hire this person who isn't grateful to be here. And what we're suggesting is that is obscene. No one should have to live in a world where they have to give so much of themselves, especially when we all look at employer marketing materials and say, wow, that looks like a pretty cool place to work. And they are actually encouraging me to be myself. And they're telling me that I should feel empowered. Well, then If we believe that, then I think we should be empowered enough to hold employers accountable to actually live by the things that they're saying. And they're not going to get it right every time, but it is on us as people and as employees, I think, to continue to push. And so all of that to say, that's part of the push that we're doing, right? Because we really can't talk about building wealth without talking about the process and the experience that many of us have to go through in order to receive the income which is the primary ingredient in actually doing so. And so it's been a really interesting and insightful experience kind of receiving those notes. And yeah, and we knew this when we wrote it. It was going to be the type of story that just sits with people for a while. It sits in the back of their mind, and they're going to wait until they see me or see us in person and say, I read that thing, and I'm getting text messages and those kinds of things. But very few people, I think, have the courage or the willingness to just openly and in a public space express agreement or something like that. So it's been really, really interesting.
One thing that you say in the article that's very interesting is also not necessarily realizing or having to understand that when you are Black or brown, really, and you make it to the director level and up, then you're not necessarily going to be able to look at for other people that look like you. And it just took me back because I worked my team, I think it was like 25 people, 2 Black people. There was only 1 Black director. And yeah, she just had enough on her plate so that she wouldn't be able to look out for me or anyone else.
Yeah. And I think that's the hard part, because it reminds me of like when the Me Too movement finally picked up some steam, where women finally admitted that there was this weight, this thing that they had experienced that was not positive, but there was a welcomed avenue, safe space to say those things because it was encouraged by the media and this huge push, and it had a cute little hashtag. I don't know what that's going to be for the Black work experience, but it has to be something, because the reality is a lot of us do not realize that when you get that good job, that's the peak of your career, right? The data suggests that only 1% of us will make it beyond the director level to VP. And then when you get to the C-suite, you're talking about 1% of 1%, especially if you're not looking at tracks like HR and diversity and inclusion. And so the idea of being so excited about finally achieving something, but then also recognizing that it's pretty much all downhill from here, this is the plateau part of my career, is a really bitter pill to swallow. And we want more people to address that, to confront that and say, it doesn't have to be this way. We can demand better for ourselves, or you can plan so that that's actually the point in your career in which you exit corporate America as a whole and take your skill to the free market of the internet or wherever, freelancing, contracting, and get what it's worth.
And so for you, Kiersten, what made you leave corporate America?
I had reached that director role. I had finally gotten the director job, and it was right after Julien had left. And so I got a year and a half of my belt of being the breadwinner and living off of our income and traveling and doing all of the things. And 18 months later, organizations started to reorg. And so I had a whole new boss. I had more responsibilities, less budget, less autonomy, less freedom. And at the same time, my business was growing outside of work. My business was becoming viable. And I was at this crossroads where I had to ask myself, at this point, what is this job teaching me? Who is it teaching me to be? And it was teaching me to be somebody who doesn't stand up for themselves, is scared to push back, accepts less than what you're worth, takes on higher responsibilities and more impossible goals with less resources. That's not how I wanted to spend my time. I had a child at home, I had a business, I had family obligations. And so the pressure of continuing in a workplace that wasn't supporting me, despite what they were asking me to do, just didn't feel like a natural decision. And so that was the trigger for me.
One of the things that I really like about you guys is you've been very transparent about, you guys started very frugal, debt-free, living in a paid-off house, working towards financial independence, the corporate route. And then along the way, you got changed, you became full-time entrepreneurs, you got a mortgage. And it really goes to show that in life, things are not linear and you have to be flexible.
Yeah, it's one of the hardest parts about writing our book, because what the industry wants and what people are used to reading and what they want is a step-by-step guide. If I do these 7 things, if I do these 12 things, I am going to land on Boardwalk and have the life of my dreams. And what we're saying is actually your relationship with money is a relationship. It requires you to check in and change your mind and consider new information and revisit decisions that you've made. And when you do that, that is when you actually discover the freedom that's associated with financial independence and wealth, is when you feel compelled and don't feel stuck into one path of doing things. You can actually experience life as it's meant to be lived. And so, yeah, you're right. We keep we keep making progress and then kind of pivoting and then making more progress and pivoting. And we're saying that's actually the way that life happens.
So from when you guys started Rich and Regular to now, how have your views about money changed over the years?
That's a very simple question to ask.
More complex to answer.
No, I think it's changed in a lot of ways. And I'll say specifically for our experience, and a lot of this is based on our more recent entrepreneurial experience.
I mean, I think the biggest way that my mindset has changed is I used to try to apply the rules of personal finance to the world of entrepreneurship and self-employment. And there are some things that overlap, but it's very difficult to apply the rules of thumb from personal finance if you do not have a traditional 9-to-5 W-2 job. The idea that you have pay coming in every other week and it's the exact same amount and you make your decisions and you set and forget and you give every dollar a job and you automate everything. Those rules don't work if you are in a position where income doesn't come in consistently. And if it does come in consistently, it's not the same amount each time, or you have to self-fund healthcare, or you have other expenses and you have different tax rules and options that you can play with. And so at first I was trying to still live my life the same way I did when I had a W-2 check when I was an entrepreneur, and it just led to more stress. I would try to set a plan for the year when really I needed to be making a plan for the next 6 weeks and just working that. And then after that plan is done, look at the next 6 to 8 weeks and work that. And it has required me to be more engaged with my money than I was when I had a check coming in every other week.
I completely agree with that. That was in part where my brain was going. I just wasn't able to articulate it as well as Kiersten did. I think my shortened version or addendum to that would be, over just the last 5 years, I think my relationship with risk has evolved significantly. I am much more comfortable with risk. In fact, risk excites me now. Whereas 5 years ago, I wanted no parts of it whatsoever. I wanted to take the most certain bet, the most comfortable bet, the most predictable path as possible. So that relationship with risk has in many ways led us to this point where now I am excited by it. And a lot of that has to do with making the transition from being a W-2 employee to now being self-employed. And to Kirsten's point, having a much wider array of buttons and levers to push to generate income. And that to me is actually more exciting than it was 5 years ago.
Does your ability or your willingness to take risk also have anything to do with maybe your bank account growing over the past?
Oh, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yes,
Yeah.
100%. For sure. It absolutely does. And so yet we are here because of that, on the foundation of taking safe bets consistently over a 10 or 15-year period. Right now we're at a point where we're willing, and dare I say it's easy, really. It's easy to make these bets. If it doesn't go well, it's perfectly fine. I will still be really grateful for the lessons that I've learned. And I may be interested in applying those lessons to a new venture, or it may just be a story that I tell at cocktail parties and barbecues for the rest of my life. But either of those are favorable to me than the way I would have viewed it 10 years ago, which is nothing more than just an idea that I never acted on. And really that to me is just a future frustration, because at some point you're going to sit back and watch someone else bring to life an idea that you once had, but you were too afraid to actually act on it. I'm much more comfortable being willing to say, well, I have my own version, my own set of ideas that I brought to life. Some have worked really, really well. Some didn't. Here's what I learned. And I can either help someone else, or I can take those lessons and reapply it to a new idea or entrepreneurial venture.
I love that. So apart from, I guess, obviously the wealth aspect that has made you more comfortable taking those chances, can you maybe share some of the things that happen as far as mindset that have gotten you to that point of getting more and more comfortable?
A lot of it is time. And by that, I mean, especially as an entrepreneur in a relatively new space, and by space, I mean this creator economy, where you essentially have the ability to not just make yourself a brand, but a media platform or a multimedia platform. This is a media platform, no different than any other Joe Rogan's podcast. It is what it is. It should be treated with the same level of regard. You can literally get the same equipment. It's pretty approachable these days. But I think time, or what we call lapse, you've gone a couple quarters, you've gone a couple years. If you do a good job of taking notes and looking back on what you've learned, you just learn to grow more and more comfortable with the inconsistencies. You can predict them or you can plan for them, but it's far less disruptive to you, right? To Kiersten's point, and again, this isn't to knock W-2 employees, but now when I think about that predictable income, it's almost like a drug that lulls you to sleep. And I know I sound crazy saying it, but that's not exciting to me. Obviously, there's value in that, but it's certainly not exciting. And I think you learn from that. And you also learn from inconsistency. And the more accustomed you get to that, it's just like a roller coaster. The first time you get on a roller coaster, it's probably going to really scare you. But if you ride it 3-4 times, after a while, you look at some people and they're smiling. It's like, how are you smiling right now? I am terrified. And I think entrepreneurship is the same way. It's not that sinking feeling in your gut goes away. You just don't really react to it the same way because you felt it 10 times before. And so whenever things get a little weird, we now have the benefit of saying, oh, well, remember the last time you said that, then this is what happened. And so it's just a completely different world. And so I don't know so much that it's a mindset shift, so much as it's almost just like an adjustment. You adjust to the new world. It could also just be an act of being really stubborn and deciding to stay on the roller coaster. But either way, your body and your mind kind of adjusts to whatever the new environment is.
So one of the ways that you guys have built wealth is through real estate. And then you decided that you didn't want to be real estate investors anymore.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that experience. Why did you decide to let go of your investment properties?
I think it was for us, there wasn't enough flexibility in the pricing and in the value that made us feel comfortable. So if you are a landlord, you can only adjust to us as the kind of landlords we wanted to be. We only wanted to adjust rent a certain amount based off of what was affordable in a given area. And what we were seeing was that home values were skyrocketing. A lot of landlords were increasing prices, and there just wasn't a lot of flexibility in a world where people are signing a 12-month lease and then making a decision 12 months later to really use that asset and make it as liquid as we needed it to be to build our businesses. And so when we liquidated it and traded it in for this more digital entrepreneurship, sort of flexible pricing model, that made more sense for us because in any given month, if I just need $1,000, I can do a number of activities. I can freelance, I can do speaking engagements, I can do anything. Versus other months where I might want something a little more long-term and stable, like a brand partnership or an ambassadorship or something like that. And so for us, it no longer matched our lifestyle when we started thinking about where we wanted to be in the future. Do we want to practice geo arbitrage and live overseas for a couple of months? It was an asset that felt like it was holding us back more than it was giving us.
Felt like a giant bond portfolio,
Yeah.
quite honestly, just in terms of the rate of return that it was giving us compared to the rate of return that we were getting in some of the new entrepreneurial endeavors that we were undertaking. And it just kind of felt like a drag on our portfolio. And it also felt like we were subscribing to an outdated way of building wealth. And a lot of that has to do with, I would say these were like B to C level properties. So we weren't, these were amazing.
Yeah, these were in metropolitan areas where you could do short-term rentals and all the other fancy ways that real estate investors are doing now to kind of take advantage of irrational pricing.
Yeah.
But back then it was a little dated.
It was certainly positive cash flow, but it also just felt like we had the benefit of being able to have earned income, dare I say, passively in a number of ways. And when we compared the effort to the return for real estate, it just felt more of a hassle compared to some of the newer ways of earning income. And so we came to learn it's far easier to drive traffic to a website and earn income that way than it is to drive rent, or you can't even drive market appreciation for a property. And so we really just decided to lean into the future. And I would say now we're pretty much completely leaning into the future. And it's not to say that we'll never invest in real estate, but it's just not a very interesting investment class.
For us. When you meet real estate investors, they're like,
There's a certain type
cult.
of people.
They love it. They love it. And we never loved it. We did it because it made sense. It was lucrative. It's tested. It's proven, but we never loved it. And in real estate, especially in real estate investment, there's not really a middle ground. If you're going to be a small real estate investor like we were with a couple of properties on your belt, it means you have to have a W-2 job or a ton of cash to be able to get these mortgages. The alternative is that you become a full-time real estate investor. You got a bunch of doors and you're kind of leveraging the value of the properties to acquire more. There wasn't this middle ground where I could be a creative and be a real estate investor, able to get mortgages and refinance the way that I want to, because traditional banking hasn't caught up with other ways of making income outside of W-2 jobs. And so again, when you think about the trajectory, it was like, you either got to go all the way in or you got to stay kind of small, but then tethered to this traditional workforce. And neither one of those seemed like good options for us based on what we wanted to do.
And so over the past few years, you guys have leaned into more so being content creators, but you also haven't followed the rules. Like,
no,
post 3 times a day on Instagram, and you guys are shooting money on the table, and then you'll take breaks in between. And somehow all of this stuff has been working for you guys. What's the secret recipe?
Thank you so much
I love that question.
for noticing. The secret recipe is being creative storytellers. It is having a passion for creativity. It is having a global perspective. It is being trained in marketing and distribution and branding and sales and all of those things and applying that to your efforts. And also understanding that as a marketer, your rule is to maximize exposure while minimizing activity. No savvy marketer wants to spend a lot of money on marketing. No savvy marketer wants to have the most complicated marketing funnel. It should be as simple as possible. It's easier to manage, it's more affordable, and it works. So that's what we really wanted to do. And to your point, it's worked. The other thing I'll say is we try to do things that no one can really replicate. We're trying to create the thing that's going to be disruptive, that's going to stop you. And so, yeah, are you going to stop and at least click on the thing that's 30 minutes long in a world when everyone is doing 60 seconds or less? Yeah. Now, there's sometimes a consequence to that, because even during the second season of Money on the Table, and I'll just call it out, Instagram decided to tweak their algorithm and it completely suppressed all of that content. But if we were to have responded to that, then we wouldn't be creative anymore. We'd just be making content for the algorithm. That's not the type of relationship that I want. I'm not going to write the article that says 12 ways to do that. I'm going to write an article that's arguably not optimized for SEO, but is memorable. You're going to read it and it's going to own a part in your memory that I think is far more valuable. We live by this, is that we aim for the heart and not the head.
And I think that is also the secret sauce, is that we don't assume that education is the problem. We've met enough people, we've listened to your stories, and we've looked at your LinkedIn profiles, and I see what you do for a living every day. You're smart. People are smart. They understand these concepts. So what else is stopping them? Besides not knowing the difference Roth 401k and a regular 401k? Like, that's not the issue. Because if I told you the definition right now, it's not like you go into your phone and start investing right away. And so what we try to do, and it's a creative exercise that we do every week. What is stopping people this week? Is it that the kids are headed back to school? Is it that you need to start booking flights for spring break? You're trying to figure out summer camps, whatever it is. That's clearly what's on my mind. Whatever it is, let's talk about how money intersects with those moments. And that's kind of what we focus on. We also don't assume that our competitions, so to speak, competition for attention and for likes and views, are these huge media companies like BuzzFeed and Forbes and anyone else who has the capability and the staff to produce as much content as they do. You know, these people are posting 80 things a day and they're on Twitter all the time. And to your point, 3 Instagram posts a day. That's because there's a huge system funding all of that content, and it's a machine. For everyday creator, we're not machines, and nor do we want to sign up to be one just for the purposes of getting people who are interested in that kind of thing. We knew if we just served our audience, they would find us. It's not that simple, but like, serve our audience and we would attract the kind of people who aren't looking for another version of BuzzFeed or Forbes.
You guys said so much just now, especially like the part about writing articles, that education is not really the problem. And for me, as an up and coming writer, I had to make the decision, am I going to write so I can get paid, or am I going to write the stories that I think is going to touch someone to take action? Coming up, it's not easy, but I feel like the more I've leaned into it, the better off it's worked out for me.
Yeah, it's certainly not easy. I can attest to that.
I think it's also safe to say that we've reached a point where I think people who are and have mastered the art of writing those types of articles will be obsolete. I mean, a lot of those things can really be written by artificial intelligence at this point. We're probably a year away from that happening. And so I foresee a lot of those writers struggling with competing, because it's like, if it's not going to be written by artificial intelligence, it's going to be written by somebody else who's willing to do it at a lower rate. And it's not fulfilling. So I didn't walk away from a six-figure job to do that. That's just not interesting to me. And so I decided to do more, to do something that I cared about, to be creative and to lean into those things. And we had, I think, a good reservoir of experiences to pull from. And to your point, I feel like it's worked. It could always work a little better, but we're happy with where we are. We're happy with where we're going. It feels good, and that matters to us.
So on the website, Kiersten, you wrote that you can decide you're done waiting. I spent decades of my life waiting for perfect timing and bulletproof certainty, when it turns out none of that exists. Instead, believing that I can be whatever I want without feeling the pressure to be the best has been life-changing.
Yes.
What happened to get you to that point?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know that there was a single event, but it is something that I work on every single day. I journal, I meditate, I work out, I get centered, I go into nature. It's something that I have to actively recalibrate my brain, because it is not the default assumption, particularly if you're a Black woman in America, that you do not have to be the best at everything, nor do you have to wait to be chosen, nor do you have to be perfect. And so eliminating all of that conditioning and learning how to recognize it when it's happening so that I don't internalize it is a daily practice for me. I imagine is a daily practice. It will be a daily practice for the rest of my life. It's gotten easier. I can now kind of smell the BS from a mile away, but it's a skill that pays in dividends. It's a skill that, going back to your point about breaking the rules and still having it be successful, it allows me to sniff out what kind of clients, what kind of followers and supporters are the ones that will actually support this version of me, this self-actualized version of me, and fulfill my business the way that I want to do it. But yeah, I don't think it's been an event. It's just been a process of coming through a lot of rituals and routines and self-care. That sounds so fluffy, but that's...
And so for you, Julien, you went from being a chef to business, marketing, content creator. For any of the listeners who are contemplating a career pivot, what kind of advice do you have?
I would say, and I know this is easier said than done, so don't roll your eyes yet.
They're still rolling their eyes at my answer.
Oh, yeah. All right, well, then I'll be a little edgier and I'll just say, get over yourself. Honestly, you're the one overthinking it more than anyone else. And I will also say that it doesn't matter what you do. Some people are going to support you, some people aren't. It doesn't matter what you do. So just do it, honestly. I think a lot of people struggle with it because they're overcomplicating the decision. I also think people feel a lot of embarrassment or shame around the shift because there's so much equity in this old identity. And so to leave that world or to change that story is to accept that maybe I was wrong. Maybe you were wrong, but maybe the world changed in between the moment you started preparing for that life, that job, or that career compared to where you are now. And I think today, especially while new economies and new currencies and new industries are being created, you owe it to yourself to be as flexible as possible and to pay attention and to see some of these new opportunities. And I think especially in the creator world, we tell this story in our book, I remember what I thought an influencer was back in 2015. And even that perspective was rooted in a bit of elitism. I kind of felt like these were silly, immature people who take pictures of themselves all day. And I am, to some people, they would say I'm an influencer, but I get paid very well to be an influencer. And I'm doing work that I think is groundbreaking, quite honestly. And it has opened up so many doors for me. And I think a lot of people would want that. You would want to do something that is rewarded and celebrated, that feels good, that is purpose-driven and lucrative. That is the world that we live in, and we're proud of that. And so if you're thinking about being a creator, don't let little things like, oh, what are people going to say about me? Don't worry about that. Be more interested in what the new people who haven't met you yet are going to say about these new ideas and these new skills that you're bringing to the table. So don't overthink it. Just change, switch it up, do what you have to do, and tell your own story.
And I think one of the things that you guys have been really good at is figuring out how to make your experiences work with what you're doing next. You're incorporating your experience as a chef, your marketing. So I think maybe also making the pieces of the puzzle fit together instead of treating everything as like a separate experience.
Yes. That has been something that every single time it happens, it blows my mind because it's hugely beneficial to us. And honestly, I think everything actually fits together, but you've got to fiddle. You got to give yourself enough time to fiddle to see how it fits. And when it does, you finally hear that snap, it's like, oh my gosh, that's the thing that will uniquely separate you from other people in your category. And that feeling is awesome. I hope a lot of people get an opportunity to kind of feel that, but it will require them to start fiddling, to start exploring outside the lane that they're in. And to your point, looking at all of the different pieces of their skill set and realizing that actually, wow, this thing that I do at this job that my boss actually doesn't care about, that's 1/10 of my day-to-day responsibility, is really lucrative outside of this agreement. So maybe I should explore that and fiddle with that. And I think that's weird to people because there's so much pride in some of the other things that they do, and they feel like they've gone so far down that road that it's almost like that sunk cost fallacy. I don't want to lose out on the carrot that I believe is coming, but I'm encouraging you to take a breath, step to the side, look outside of that arena, look outside of that company, that industry, whatever it is, and start compartmentalizing all of your skill sets to find a thing where there really is a lot of room for growth and fulfillment.
I love that. So I follow you guys on Twitter, and you have some of the best takes. Your Twitter is very informative, and it's also pretty funny as well. And as a couple, I don't even know how you guys managed to have one Twitter account, but it seems that as far as working together as a couple, you've mastered that. So do you have any tips for the dreamers on that? How to work effectively with your spouse? How can you work and make money with your spouse?
It's taken a little bit of trial and error because at first we tried to do everything together and we just have very different points of view and we have very different skill sets. And so I think it was probably a year and a half ago where out of necessity of just the pandemic and having our son at home, we started to divide and conquer. And in that process, we learned, here's what comes really easy to you. Here's what comes really easy to me. And we decided to just let it be easy. We let go of the corporate expectations of personal development. And you need to learn how to, read articles and I need to learn how to video edit. It's just too much time for me to try to do it. So I will organize it. I am the organizer, the logistics, the agenda maker, details person, and he is the creative idea generating, graphic designing, video editing head of the ship. So luckily we have skills that are opposite from each other. If we had the same skills, we probably have a different set of challenges working together. But by the time we come together to make a decision, we're both bringing valuable perspectives that we can weigh. And luckily there are enough decisions where we can give and take and say, all right, well, we'll follow your lead on this one. I'll take this one and we'll see what happens at the end. Let's move on to something else.
So let's talk about your upcoming book. When is it coming out?
June 14th, 2022.
Tell me about it. It's called Cashing Out.
Yes, Cashing Out, Win the Wealth Game by Walking Away. And it is basically, it's a labor of love. It is a money book that is written for Black professionals, but could be applicable to anybody, particularly if you're a marginalized identity. But it talks about the process of work. It talks about that first mindset shift, that first wake-up call to realize the stakes of where we are as a community, as African Americans, in terms of net worth and progress on the economic front in the US, how the workplace does and does not support our goals for wealth building, and then what you can do as an individual to make sure that your family is protected and that you give your income a purpose, and introduces financial independence as this concept to people that they can latch onto as a reason for being at work instead of just the reasons that you might tell yourself. Like we go through an exercise of like, think about why you work so hard. A lot of people will cite their family, but the research and the data and the time required shows that you don't really get to spend a lot of time with your family if you actually want to be successful at work. So we're just pointing out all of these ironies and coupling them with money advice, financial advice, just life advice is kind of a little older in the journey than some people, just talking about what we've learned.
Love it. So I'd like to end the interview with a round of rapid fire questions. I don't know how
right,
it's going to work with two of you guys.
I'm terrible at these, by the way, so if I ruin it, my bad.
Tell me about a book that changed your perspective on life.
Oh, I just read one. It's called Quit Like a Woman by Holly Whitaker, and it's about our relationship with drinking and what it means to be a non-drinker in a world that is obsessed with alcohol.
What's one thing about money you wish you could tell your younger self?
It's not really about money, but it's around starting a business. I so wish I just started a business or sold something. I don't have the version of that Kiersten has of selling t-shirts as a kid, or the idea of selling newspapers. I wish I'd just grown more comfortable with selling as a way of life and earning income at a much earlier age. That wasn't something that was exposed to me. So yeah, I was a shy kid.
What's the best investment in yourself you've made so far?
Video editing. I know that's weird, but video editing has been the most lucrative investment that I could have made, and fulfilling, I'll say. It's something that I wanted to learn how to do back in 2010. But again, I was working, told myself it was too complicated. I didn't have the time, but as an entrepreneur, it has been without question a very lucrative skill.
Filling the blank in 3 words or less. Money to me is?
Money to me is energy. It's something that is created. Now I'm trying to think of that quote. See, this is why I'm so terrible at it. Creative. It's not destroyed. It's either exchanged or I don't even remember the quote, but it's energy.
I was going to say fun.
And it's fun.
What do you want your legacy to be?
Generous. I want to be known as generous.
Griot.
Storyteller.
I want to be a storyteller.
Kiersten and Julien, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. Please tell the dreamers where to find you.
You can find us on our website at richandregular.com. We're also on all of the social media networks under the handle Rich and Regular, and you can find our book Cashing Out on pre-sale anywhere that books are sold.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Definitely be on the lookout for Julien and Kiersten's book, Cashing Out, Win the Wealth Game. Also check out their series, Money on the Table, and Thank Me Later.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Dreamers Podcast. You can find the episode show notes and all of the links mentioned at dreamoflegacy.com. If you liked today's episode, here's what you can do to support me and help more dreamers discover the podcast. Follow the podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. Rate and review the podcast to help the podcast gain more visibility. Share the podcast with your family, friends, and coworkers. And if you really enjoyed today's episode, please take a second to tag me at thedreamers.podcast on Instagram and let me know what you liked about today's episode. All right, dreamers, that's it for today. I will see you back here next week for another episode of the Dreamers Podcast.
Okay, dreamers, time to build this legacy.
This podcast is for general information purposes only. It is not intended to provide any tax, legal, financial planning, insurance, accounting, investment, or any other kind of professional advice or services. Please consult with an appropriate tax, financial, or legal professional to receive appropriate advice based on your situation.